You know, New York is a very, very liberal place. And Trump is soon to find out his fate, whether he will be running as president as a convicted felon or as a former president. You know, Jean Carroll's 2 jury trials sort of gives us an indication where this could possibly go, or maybe this is O.J. Simpson all over again. Oh, of course, the evidence for O.J. was overwhelming, but as John and Cochran said, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. Let me bring in our very special guest today on this June 1st. You like that, did you? Yes, you like that. Bruce Fein and Ed Martin. You know, it is Saturday, June 1st. I'm assuming, as we taped this show earlier, that the verdict has not come in yet. But however, Bruce Fein, what does the Jean Carroll verdict tell us for Trump, and why New York is unique in and of itself?
Well, New York is, I don't know whether unique. I think they're similar to California. It's a very, very heavily Democratic state. And it's not only statewide, but we're trying the case in New York City, which is even more Democrat than statewide. Now, Jean Carroll civil suits that collectively rendered judgments unanimously against Mr. Trump, approaching $90 to $100 million, is instructive because there, Mr. Trump also declined to take the witness stand in his defense. Now, the judge always gives instructions in criminal cases as required by the Fifth Amendment. You can't draw an adverse inference. But human beings are human beings. It's like asking someone not to draw an adverse inference that water is wet. And this is after Trump's character was rather savagely maligned by both his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, and Stormy Daniels. Now, I'm not vouching for their credibility, but a juror would say, well, why isn't Trump taking the stand to refute what their allegations are? Now, there can be tactical reasons that the lawyers have, but the jury will, in my view, find that difficult to understand. I view that the greatest stumbling block of the prosecution is the issue of whether New York can make it a crime under New York law, to falsify a business record to violate the Federal Election Campaign Act. That it's kind of a hybrid between federal and state law. That's a gray area. It's a pure legal issue. It's not something that's decided by the jury, but it's certainly something that would be right for post-verdict motion or on appeal.
Ed, it only takes one juror of 12 for Trump not to be found guilty.
Well, that's right. I mean, yeah, of course. A hung jury, as what I have always said, is the most likely scenario. I don't think you're going to get 12 people to acquit Donald Trump. And as you point out in New York, if you had asked me about the Jean Carroll, the comparison, I would have actually mentioned the juries. I think the jury pool is very tough to feel good about if you're Donald Trump, just as a defendant. And I will say, my colleague Bruce, who is something of a constitutional expert and I think something of a civil libertarian, I think would acknowledge what New York did in both cases. The civil case with Carroll was they extended the law, they extended the statute of limitations, and they extended the law to basically, he was never charged with the crime. He was charged with defamation, talking about the crime. In fact, the jury said, we have no evidence and we don't hold that he did commit the crime, that was rape, but we do say he defamed her by talking about what happened. Well, that's a pretty tough standard to live up to. And the same thing has happened in the courtroom right now, except it's criminal. Bragg said, we're going to extend this a minor misdemeanor about records keeping, and we're going to pretend that we know that somehow a federal crime was on the end of it, which had to do with campaign finance, and therefore we're going to charge you with this litany of felonies, which is a New York way to drag this into a felony charge. It's all very, very contrived, And when you have a contrived prosecution with real, talented lawyers who are doing this, and then you're faced with a jury pool that is going to be 90% against you, the best hope is that one or two jurors say, oh man, that didn't add up, and I'm not going to be convinced. But I will point out, and maybe Bruce can explain to me, in New York, this judge has 6 alternate jurors. And there is some room when a jury comes back and says, we're deadlocked, but the one juror who we're deadlocked with is really a jerk. He doesn't act nice. He didn't wash his hands after he went to the bathroom. Judge, get him out of here. Can the judge, he's got 6 alternates who sat through the whole trial. Can he trade them out? And can he trade out jurors until he gets 12 that convict? That feels like where this is was headed from the very beginning.
Bruce Fein, where does Trump go from here? What other legal wranglings does he face before the November 5th elections? And will it have any impact or just further embolden his voter base?
Well, if I could just preliminarily, Armstrong, note that a similar but not a comparable exact case was brought against John Edwards for paying off Riel Hunter in order to keep secret his love child to protect his campaign for vice. I think he was running for president then. Now there you ended up with a hung jury. It wasn't in New York, however. I believe it was in North Carolina.
Federal court though, right? Federal court, wasn't it?
So it was in federal court for sure. Yes.
Yeah, it was a federal charge though. It was a campaign. It was the campaign finance charge that he was trying to hide. They never got to put on evidence that showed that they never showed any evidence that the reason that the Stormy Daniels payment, which did occur from Cohen, that's what they're struggling with.
Why don't we let Bruce finish his point?
Yeah.
All right. Why don't we do that?
I'll let you can critique it.
Thank you, Bruce.
I'm not saying that they're exact. I'm saying that the theory of the John Edwards case was the basic theory of the tail end of the New York case, namely that money was paid to conceal what would be politically embarrassing sexual information about the candidate. And there, you did have a hung jury. They did decide not to retry him. But again, the difference is a New York jury rather than otherwise. But I think, to go to your question, I'm not trying to be evasive, Armstrong. There are 3 other pending criminal cases. Only one, I think, has a chance of being tried before November. Anyway, the 2 that I think are on a slower track are, one, the Espionage Act obstruction of justice case in Florida concerning alleged mishandling of presidential documents by Donald Trump, including obstructing and hiding evidence that was subject to a subpoena. That's on a rather slow track. And there's a companion Georgia case, largely pivoting on alleged phony electors, and also Mr. Trump's, I guess, a audio tape that we heard when he was communicating with Georgia electoral officials, asking them to find, new votes, or otherwise they could confront the possibility of criminal prosecution, and that would be tampering with an election. But that's also slow because it involves Fannie Willis, who I assume, if you've been Rip Van Winkle, you know all the issues raised by hiring an alleged or shown boyfriend, and whether there are conflicts of interest, and her retention in the case is on appeal. So I don't think that's going to happen for November. Now, the one case that could is the January 6th case concerning attempting to prevent the peaceful transfer of presidential power, be called defrauding the government under Section 371 of the U.S. Code. There's a companion count that's in the Supreme Court about obstructing a congressional proceeding and counting the votes. We don't know how that's going to come out, but even if it exculpates Trump, it leaves the other charge of defrauding the government out of the correct transfer of power according to electoral votes in play. But that will only be tried before November if the Supreme Court, in a pending case where Mr. Trump is claiming absolute immunity from criminal prosecution even after he leaves office, is decided completely against Mr. Trump, in which the court declares that whether or not what he did was a presidential act once he's out of office, he can be prosecuted if it was criminal. During the oral argument, there was clearly some division in the sentiment of the justices. The court has had all the briefing and the argument it needs. It could come out with a decision the first week of June or the last week of June. If it decides, however, that the prosecution must bifurcate its evidence in between presidential and non-presidential acts, it's going to lead to further hearings, and that case won't get to trial before November. My own view is that whatever the outcomes of these cases, its impact on the voters will be at the edges. It's not going to be a tsunami by any means. Maybe you're shifting 4 or 5% of voters if Trump is convicted.
You know,
that 4 or 5% could make a difference in battleground states because it's not a nationwide campaign.
You know, Ed Martin, Hillary Clinton reappeared this week. She has a new book out, What Happened? What happened in 2016? And believe it or not, she said women abandoned her after Comey requested her emails, and as a result of that, she lost the election because she was, in her own words, Bruce and Ed, imperfect. She went on to say that Donald Trump, her legacy, the man that she lost to, is an existential threat to America. If he were to win again, he will turn back the clock on women's rights, women's health care, gays, and civil rights. And had she won, there's a possibility that Neil Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh would not have been confirmed if she had been in the Senate. And also, had she been in president, Roe versus Wade would still be in place. She called the Democrats weak, lack of backbone, and they're not willing to fight with conservatives and Republicans who get up, dust themselves off, and know how to fight again. And it was a harsh, harsh indictment of the Democratic Party. What happened, Ed? She told us, but what happened?
Well, no, look, I actually think this is really a wonderful thing to understand. Everyone who is a nominee for president of a major party gets, what I call, presidential disease, like malaria. It's in your bloodstream. You know, John Kerry has it. John McCain had it before he died. You just can't understand. You got this close and you weren't president. And it's very hard to go back to ever being a normal person. I actually mean that in sort of a compliment. Her mindset, she spent about 2 years after her loss saying that Donald Trump was not legitimate, that the election was crooked, it was fixed, and that he fixed it and Putin fixed it and all that. That was all shown to be false. But she said it for a while. Now she's blaming women. I don't know that the numbers hold up on that, but I do think that what she's signaling is the Democrat Party is now solidly the party of women. In that book and in her interviews, she said not only would she have been the one who saved Roe, now she wants to get a president in the Democratic Senate and Democrat House and pass that as a standalone bill and make sure that there's protections for even late-term abortion. So, look, I think Hillary, her time has come and gone, but I think she wishes and wants to be relevant. And when she sees Joe Biden in the Oval Office, she has to say to herself, how did this guy get there? Because I know how to do this more than he does. And she probably is frustrated and watching what's going on. But I don't know that she's moving the needle in any way, in a dramatic way, to build the party or build the consensus that we want more of the Biden administration.
Here's what I think before I say goodbye to Bruce and Ed Martin. I think Hillary Clinton has come out a major depression. Her loss to Trump sent her into a very deep and dark place. I think it caused her mental anguish. It caused her to question herself. And everything she has ever stood for and represented, whether United States Senate, First Lady, Secretary of State, was all diminished because Donald Trump beat her. And the reason why they beat her, because of Benghazi. I was fired at on the tarmac. People saw her as being corrupt, dishonest. But the sad news is, even in what happened, she never discusses her contribution to what happened. And we'll be back. Thank you for joining us. Let us welcome back Victoria Churchill, conservative writer, editor, and commentator with Young Voices, and JAHMIEL Jackson, staff writer and associate chair for Thinker Chicago. Thank you for joining the show today. JAHMIEL, let me start with you out of Chicago. It's the home of the Democratic Convention this year. There's a lot that's at stake. People are talking about the protests. People are saying to me as a broadcaster, I should stay out of Chicago. It could be dangerous. That only encourages me. Why don't you tell us what is your generation is looking for in a presidential candidate and what is not being discussed enough with your generation? And welcome.
Thank you for inviting me on the show. I would say for my generation, we always have these conversations in terms of when we graduate college, what kind of jobs are available for us or what kind of opportunities we look for? Can we pay back our student loans? Because there's so many people who are millennials and who are Gen Xers who are buried in school debt. And I think we're trying to avoid that fate as well. In terms of the election, I think many of us are focused on real world issues and actually having timelines for, let's say, the war that's happening in Israel versus Hamas, or the war that's happening between Russia and Ukraine. When are those wars going to end? Or we understand that the economy is in the best place, but at what kind of timeline can we expect it to get better? Or, you know, we're also looking to get jobs and own a home someday. When are the interest rates for housing going to go down? And I think I'm going to vote for the president who actually can provide a plan to actually move forward on those topics.
So how do you wrestle with that, JAHMIEL, when you have two obviously very flawed leaders? How do you come to a conclusion? It doesn't seem as though the label of Republican is as offensive as it once were to a certain demographic. Because like you said, people are struggling. They want to know what their future is. And not only do they just don't want a decent job, they want to be able to own. They don't want to tax. And even though you may making money, as you just alluded, but inflation is killing you.
Mm-hmm. I think my generation, we've completely foregone the generic titles of Republican and Democrat. I think maybe because I'm a registered Democrat, but I consider myself a conservative Democrat in that I still look towards fiscal responsibility. I also look towards, the reason why I don't call myself a Republican is because the Republican Party used to be, I would say, let's say 10 years ago, a party for big corporations who didn't really look out for the little guy. But now you see a really momentum shift into the Republican Party being the party of the working class. And I think that's what's attracting many young voters who are looking for some kind of economic stability, who come from working class families like my own. So I think we're trying to balance the differences between the two parties and picking out which ones speak to us in the specific moment.
Let me go to you here. You know, what are the most pressing concerns for young Americans regarding education and student debt, and what solutions are being proposed? And do you think that what is being proposed is good enough? Victoria.
Well, a couple of thoughts. First of all, education, I think we are really broadening the idea of what education really is in this day and age, because lots of people like myself that went to college and have student loans, we're seeing, why the heck did we do that? We learned absolutely nothing in the classroom. Everything that we've actually learned and apply in our careers day to day is things that we've learned on the job. There's definitely some kind of skills that we did pick up that enabled us to take our first or our second job. But if you've been in the workforce like me, just a few years out of college, 5, 6 years, we're really seeing that, again, most of the learning comes at the job. whatever that may be. You know, I was trained in journalism school and media school. I'm here doing media, so, you know, I was on the path to being here with my collegiate education. But I've worked for small startup media outlets. I've worked on the comm side of campaigns, and everything I learned to do in those jobs, I learned while I was doing them, not in the classroom. The classrooms taught me the theory, but nothing of what my day-to-day would look like as a journalist, a commentator, a speaker, anything that I do today. And we're seeing that we still have those student loan burdens. You know, thankfully, I ended up with very little compared to a lot of my peers. I was a student athlete, and, you know, my parents did help me out a little bit. And so it was kind of split between scholarships I got, athletics, and some family help. And so I am definitely very fortunate among other members of my generation. But we're also seeing that you don't have to go to college at all to have a good paying job. And that's why people my age and even a little bit younger, closer to my other co-contributor tonight's age, we're realizing we don't have to go to college to make a good job, and we'll actually have a better hand up in society to do things like start a family, own a home, if we don't have that student loan debt and burden weighing us down and keeping us from propelling to the next generation of what our lives look like.
So JAHMIEL, my man, this is what's fascinating to me as a broadcaster. Our president and the vice president were in Philadelphia recently. They're on this march for what they call the black vote. And the reason why they're on this march for the black vote, I don't know if you feel as though this is a PR strategy, if it's manipulation, it's not sincere, only because Trump talking about the black vote, talking about having the vice presidential debate at a historical black college and university. How do you, JAHMIEL, and your generation differentiate whether someone is sincere and they're really going to make changes and appeal to them? And do you find it offensive? What does it all mean to you when the president and the VP announce, we're going on a tour and we're going to show black people we want their votes? Really?
Mm-hmm. To answer your first question, I think it's definitely, like, I do take offense to it. It reminds me back when, I think in February, President Joe Biden, he sat down with the black father and his two black sons, and they were eating fried chicken all together to sort of celebrate Black History Month. And you see instances of so much tokenism in his administration, even the fact that he has Kamala Harris as a vice president who has contributed nothing to any kind of success that America sees now. And I think when they go on a PR tour for black people, I think they're scared because, to answer your second question, I think it has to do, I'm looking for a candidate who's going to tell the truth to black people. When I see Trump give a speech, he tells it exactly how it is, the state of the neighborhoods here, that when you live in because I'm from Philadelphia, and when you live in a dangerous neighborhood and you have your parents who are working day in and day out to try to save money to buy a house, to try to move to a safer neighborhood, you then are faced with Biden's inflation, who are keeping you in these dangerous neighborhoods where you might be lucky if you're a black man like me to make it to the age of 21, to go to a prestigious college like I am, to try to work yourself out of these situations that someone like President Biden is doing now, and what he has done throughout his term as a senator as well, that these are things that he doesn't even answer for. I think he just expects us, like he said in 2020, you know, if we're black, we're just going to vote for him. And if we don't vote for him, we're not black. And I think black people should show more self-respect to themselves and start to demand more from the Democratic Party. Do not vote for Joe Biden. And the moment black people stop voting for Democrats is where you're actually going to see Democrats come to the city and actually answer their questions and give in to their demands, because they need the black vote to win. And I suspect Trump, he may not win the black vote, more like I would say maybe 20%, which is even momentous. It's a huge factor at none the least. But I think there's going to be a reckoning when it comes to in terms of the African American vote.
No, Victoria, let me continue that thread, because I just mentioned to Bruce and Ed about former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton saying that if Trump were to win, he would turn back the clock on women's health, women's progress. And she also said that the reason why she lost is that women saw her as being not perfect, but yet if you're a man, they'll give you a pass, because you can be an imperfect man, but you can't be an imperfect woman. Does it really cheapen your intellect to say to women that you did not realize what you were doing when you did not vote for me and you voted for Trump? What does that tell women across the country?
Well, I think that actually really plays into the narrative that Democrats are trying to place on Republicans, which is, you know, I'm a woman, my vote is only what my father says or what my husband says. And that really cheapens us, as you said, as individuals, as free thinkers, as people that have their own goals and aspirations. And sure, that can be within a very vibrant and vigorous family dynamic, whether that's, again, with parents or with your own families that you're starting up. But here's the truth, is that women are able to make decisions based on things other than their body, based on things other than what they see. They feel pocketbook issues as much as men. You know, women graduate college at higher rates than men. They're in the workforce at historically high levels, and obviously right now that's gone backwards a little bit since COVID times and since a lot of women had to kind of go back into the household and leave the workforce. But I think we're kind of seeing that reverse now because of inflation and Bidenomics. Women can't afford to stay home. And so saying that women that bring home a paycheck, that see the bills that come into the household every day, or women whose husbands bring home the paycheck, and, you know, hopefully people have healthy family dynamics where the women are involved in the finances of the household, much like we are in my own household. You know, my husband and I are both proud career young professionals, both kind of paving our own lanes in this great city of Washington, D.C. and the greater D.C. region where we live. And so, you know, our votes are as equal, if not more important than the votes of men, because they often get overseen as saying, oh, well, the woman's just going to vote how her husband does. You know, my husband and I, even though we're both staunch conservatives, we disagree slightly, but we do disagree on policy issues. You know, in primary races, we might vote for different people. And that's, you know, it shouldn't come as a surprise because, again, the feminist movement told women that we could be all these things, and now you're going backwards and saying, actually, we can't. We have to face the reality as it is. And one way to take control of our future is to vote and is to have our voices known on the opinions or on the issues that matter to us, and make sure that those opinions are seen and felt at the ballot box with candidates that are running this November and every election, you know, before then in primaries and after that in 2025 and beyond.
JAHMIEL, finally, what about this obsession, which they have been warned about with James Carville, Mark Penn, who've been Democratic strategists for a long time, how it seems as though Biden and Harris is just going overboard with the transgenderism, with DEI, with gender affirming, as if this is something that minorities want. And what about the issue of morality and versus this tribalism, which seems to be becoming very pervasive across the country with the current people in the White House?
No, that's an amazing question. I think it's because I think Democrats are actually scared of what's going to happen with the black vote in this election. And I think they've never seen a jewel that's never too shiny for them. I think you see when it comes to the open border system that Joe Biden is currently running, he refuses to take any executive action on it, importing over 11 million illegal immigrants to our country. And especially when it comes to appealing to 2% of the population that is trans and dipping into far left, I think it's because his administration, it's torn between the very, very far left that, let's say, supports Hamas and some of the more moderate Democrats who actually want sensible policies. And I think since Biden isn't actually a figurehead, let's say like President Obama, to actually steer his party through the middle, I think he's dipping more into every single part of his party because he's scared that he's going to lose the most critical part, which is the black vote.
Well, JAHMIEL, let me tell you, it was certainly a pleasure to sit and listen to you and Victoria share perspective that our listeners need to hear. And I look forward to having you back on throughout this presidential season so you can share more of your perspectives. Much more when we return on this June 1st edition of the Armstrong-Williams Show.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence, there's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion. and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com.
Welcome back to the broadcast. GVEN SARIOL is the CEO of ArcWealth Educational, and Gregory Johnson is CEO at Rubicon Digital, who's joining us later. GVEN, the last time we were booking you for the show, I was stunned when I heard from you a few days later, and you were in Russia. How in the world did you get to Russia? What were you doing in Russia? And how in the world did you feel safe in Russia?
Actually, Russia is a very safe country. My wife is actually from Russia. I met her in Russia back in 2020. And we went over there to visit family. We spent some time in Siberia, which is where she's from. And then we were in St. Petersburg, which is an amazing, amazing city filled with culture. So anyways, I felt perfectly safe. Nobody ever hassled me. And we really enjoyed the time over there.
Most people in their right mind would not even think about going to Russia right now. I mean, the State Department put it at the very top of the places that America should not visit. Did you have to have a visa? I know you had to have a passport. What is life there? I spent time in Moscow. I spent time in St. Petersburg. I spent a lot of time at the Hermitage Museum there. Is everything intact? You did not feel threatened as an American?
No, man. In fact, I don't live in the U.S. right now, but it was so clean. I used to live in Denver. Denver was so dirty, so many homeless people all over the place. I mean, you could eat off the street here. Everybody was kind and pleasant. I didn't have one issue, not one time.
What are you talking about? A war is going on. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. You what? Sorry?
There's a war going on. Russia's at war.
Well, the United States been at war through proxy for many years in different countries everywhere. So I really wasn't worried about that.
Would you encourage others to go to Russia during this time?
Unless you know somebody over there, I mean, you probably don't really have a reason to, but once everything subsides, I would definitely go over there. There's so much history over there, especially if you love history, which I love. I think you'd really enjoy it. But right now, if you don't have a reason to go over there, I probably wouldn't go.
Listen, let me talk to you about this overview of Fit 21 Act and its objectives. Can you provide sort of for our audience a comprehensive overview of the Fit 21 Act and its primary objectives, and how does the Fit 21 Act aim to regulate and oversee the rapidly evolving landscape of financial technologies?
Yeah, so the Fit 21 Act stands for Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Act. And essentially what they're doing is they're bringing clarity to the crypto sphere. And so one of the things for us in crypto, I teach decentralized finance, that's been driving us nuts in the United States has been, what are the rules? How do we participate in this and follow guidelines? And we've had people like Gary Gensler and the SEC say, come on in, register, don't worry about it. And then we end up getting sued for it sometime later because there is no guidelines, there is no rules, and there is a banking problem where they're trying to slow and stifle this innovation until they can get their tentacles into this. And so now what's occurring, instead of using the SEC to weaponize regulation, what's going on is they're starting to go, okay, what are some of the things that we can look at here to make this fair so that we don't stifle innovation, so that a lot of our entrepreneurs don't move overseas. Like I was just in Dubai before I was in Russia. Tons of US entrepreneurs are moving over to Dubai, to Singapore, because they're just like, I'm not welcome here. This is not a place that is going to help this technology flourish and bring financial freedom, in my opinion. And I'm not talking about just making lots of money, just having custody of your own money to the people. And so what this is going to do, it's going to bring that back into the CFTC's purview, unless it is deemed a crypto security. And we're going to be able to have a test, not the Howey test, because that's something dating back to the early 1900s dealing with oranges. We're dealing with a totally new financial system that's super innovative, that has nothing to do with that. And now we're going to be able to test it to actually see if it is decentralized or not. If it is decentralized, it will be deemed a commodity. And if not, it will be deemed a security, which is what I think we've needed all along.
You know, Greg Johnson, not yet. Let me continue this with you. What are the intended benefits of the FIT21 Act for consumers in this financial industry?
Well, there's going to be clarity. There's going to be disclosures. There's a lot of things. In fact, when I met with you in DC, I came home and I started actually writing a book on how we could actually regulate this. But these things called smart contracts, we can actually eliminate a lot of government fat on the regulation side by implementing the legislation right on the front end of the code of the cryptocurrencies, so that we don't have to worry about having to go through this endless debate as to whether or not something is going to be safe for a consumer or not. And so the consumers on the front end, in a decentralized and fair way and transparent way, will be able to know, hey, this is an investment where I know they're not going to run off with my money. I know it's not a Ponzi scheme, and I know it's something that is legit. Now, it's still subject to ups and downs, okay, just like any investment, real estate, stock market. But they're going to know that they're getting into a legitimate investment and not just some, random thing on the blockchain that they can run off with their money. So I think this is going to be a very good thing for consumers, and it's going to bring a lot of light to the good projects out there that are doing good for people and bringing, again, that financial freedom to people.
What do you see as the state of the global economy? It seems as though no matter the criticism of the U.S. economy, it does so much better than everybody else. And as much credit as people try to give China, China is really having a meltdown with its economy that no one is really talking about. Why do you think the U.S. economy continues to sustain itself, even producing the jobs, even with all the issues that we have coming out of COVID? The United States, in other words, compared to the rest of the world, has had a very modest and decent recovery. Why not the rest of the world? And how is this inflation impacting the global supply?
Well, the reason that I think it's doing so well is because through proxies, all right, just like last year when we had a whole bunch of these bank failures, the Reserve ended up printing a whole bunch of money and injecting it basically into these banks to make sure that there wasn't a domino effect of bank failures. And so the short answer is we keep printing money to prop up the economy. Now, how long is that going to last? I don't know. And the thing that we have over other countries in the United States is what? We have the ability to print the money, and our money is the reserve currency of the world. Now, we do have countries that are in the BRICS nations, which you and I have talked about before, where they're coming together and they're putting together their own currency that allegedly is going to be backed by gold, which I highly doubt, because the majority of gold is held by the United States anyway, like way more than any other country together. I think they have more than even all the BRICS countries together in gold. But I think that the U.S. still has that advantage, is that they are the reserve currency and it is used everywhere. When I was traveling, right now I was in Dubai, Istanbul, and Russia. All of those places took dollars. Russia kind of ish, but they would take cash. So I think that's where the economy still is flourishing. And until that falls, I think the U.S. economy is still going to keep doing relatively well.
Are you telling us, before we come back and Gregory Johnson joins us, are you telling us that despite what we read when you hear about Americans going there, they're being locked up, that even with all that's going on in Ukraine and what the world says, Russia and places like Moscow and St. Petersburg where you were, things are normal, the economy is moving, you don't even have any inkling that a war is going on? How can that be?
Not moving, thriving.
Thriving.
I didn't see homeless people. I didn't see stores closed. They are growing. They're growing. And so, now their population isn't growing. That's a whole other thing. They've been stagnant since World War II in terms of their population, but the US has been able to bring people in, and that's the reason that the US population has been growing. Other than that, we'd also be stagnant as well. So it's thriving. There's a lot of innovation going on in Russia right now.
And they welcome the mighty cash of the dollar, even in Russia.
Well, what they've done is they've told a lot of the other countries, you cannot buy our oil in dollars. So what have they done? They said you can only buy it in Russian rubles. So now they got to buy rubles, which props up their currency. And they're also very, very friendly to crypto. They're a lot of the innovators are coming out of Russia. In fact, when I was in Dubai, a ton of Russians are there. Because the regulation is even better than in Russia for crypto, but there's a ton of Russians coming out of Russia to Dubai for crypto, and it's booming. They're moving and shaking.
I know you're probably just as shocked as I am hearing Delvalle tell the story about spending time in Russia, and the economy is not just inching along, it's thriving. We'll be back with much more.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
So, Gregory, what is behind the resurgence in this crypto and Bitcoin space?
Well, Armstrong, it's really good to be with you. And boy, isn't that the question of the hour today? I can answer it many ways. Let me start by what's behind the resurgence of crypto right there in Washington, D.C. If you had asked any industry observers just a few weeks ago whether or not they thought that this FIT Act was going to have a chance of getting through the House, nobody would have paid attention to you, and it would have sounded laughable. But it seems very clear to me, and many, many others, that this has become one of the hottest issues in an election season, and it's not going away anytime soon. The fact that you had 70 Democrats actually vote for this particular bill says to me that we're seeing a major shift in the division of party lines.
Don't worry about if we lost the pitch, as long as we can hear him. That's all that matters. How have they worked out the issues since Sam Johnson-Freeman, and how people are able to manipulate the crypto? People can have their accounts swiped. The numbers can be copied from these hackers. Have they worked out the security of the crypto industry? I mean, there have just been so many issues. Are they just chugging along and they work them out as they go along, Gregory?
Armstrong, one of the things that's been a real disappointment as somebody who's been in the industry.
What's the disappointment?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's been a disappointment for most of the people in the industry is the technology really hasn't lived up to the promise that everyone's been thinking about. So you talk about all of this promise of distributed ledger technologies, of cryptocurrencies. It's going to revolutionize the world. And while I believe it has the potential to do that, thus far, the criticism on the quality of the tech, and in fact, the ability for a generation of hackers to find their way into the crypto industry and basically put a generation of North Koreans through college because of all of these vulnerabilities. The attack vectors that the crypto industry has dialed up thus far have been very disappointing. You know, I heard you talking earlier in the segment about smart contracts. I'm very optimistic that once the smart contracts actually get smart or smarter, I think that's when the promise really starts to happen.
You know, let me go to Javal. How does the Act distinguish between security and commodity tokens, and why is this distinction important?
Well, essentially, the bill introduces what's called a decentralized test, and that's to determine whether the digital asset should be classified as a security or a commodity. And so what does that mean? It has to hit some levels of things. So we need to make sure that it's not just in the hands of one person or a major group of people. Now, some people may argue, you know, like the majority of Bitcoin is held right now by, you know, MicroStrategy and BlackRock and all this stuff, but it's still decentralized enough to where the majority of people outside of those entities are holding the amount of Bitcoin, and they're not able to manipulate the entire network. And the thing is, in regards to that, not only does that affect price, but it affects your ability to transact. Okay, and so the more decentralized that these blockchains are, the more it's likely to be deemed a commodity as opposed to a security. Now, let's talk about what a security might be. So let's say, for instance, I want to tokenize a property, which we've actually done. Okay, you want to tokenize a property and you want to back that token with that particular property. Well, that's actually a security. Why? Because there is an onus that you're going to make money from the residual income of, you know, whatever, the rent that's paid or the Airbnb that pays their share in that, and you're going to make some money off of that, and others are profiting off of the backs of another's effort. So that's the difference, in my opinion, between a crypto commodity and a security. And now we're having some clarity on that with this FIT Act.
You know, Gregory, what mechanism does the FIT 21 Act put in place to ensure clear and effective regulation of the digital assets? And then also the implications for the crypto industry and investors. What are the potential impacts of the FIT 21 Act on the cryptocurrency industry, particularly for startups and innovation?
Well, Armstrong, as usual, you're asking all the right questions here. If I could, I'd love to just remind everybody we need to pump the brakes maybe just a little bit. Even if this particular act is able to get through the Senate in an election year, we're talking about at best a year before we would get through this particular process. You know, you have the Lummis-Gillibrand legislation in the Senate. I got to think they're very similar from my estimation of what I've reviewed so far, but it's still going to take a while. And then after that, because we've been talking about getting the CFTC and the SEC to be on the same page, by law, they have 360 days where they're going to collaborate and circle back. So even if this does come to fruition, even if we actually have the regulatory clarity that the industry has been looking to give protection to consumers, to give protection for new digital asset projects that are looking to stay domiciled here in the United States, it's still 2 to 3 years out. Armstrong, we still have stuff that hasn't been resolved with Dodd-Frank, and that's 10 years and counting. So we got a ways to go before we even get there.
You know, Javal, so what do you see as some of the potential hiccups for crypto? I know you have this resurgence in the digital and the Bitcoin space. And is it all political? And does this change once this election season is over? Is crypto still in its own way still on unstable ground?
I mean, it's a brand new technology. It's like asking, you know, back in 1999, are you able to download a full movie online? No, you weren't able to do that, right? You still had some bandwidth issues, and that's still going on. But like anything else, innovative technology like the blockchain, it's gonna take time to mature. It's way more mature than when I first got in back in 2017, way more mature. And every year it gets better and better. But what we need to keep bringing innovators, entrepreneurs into this space so that we can solve these issues properly. And that's gonna take time, just like anything else. This isn't gonna just all of a sudden blow up. This is something that's going to take time to innovate and to think things through, just like Greg was saying.
You know, Armstrong, I'm having bandwidth issues myself today, as you can clearly tell. But I'm gonna pile onto that a little bit. You know, listen, this has been a historic year in the history of financial services. Now, I know that may sound like hyperbole to some people, but the reality is, Bitcoin ETF approval finally by the SEC less than 6 months ago, with the approval last week by the SEC for Ethereum ETFs. What the digital asset industry really needed, ironically, is for institutional adoption. You know, it's funny that, you know, the Bitcoin white paper that started this whole thing off had no intention of a centralized institution participating in the ecosystem. And yet what we've been lobbying to our clients and folks that we advise is that, ironically, you actually need centralized institutions to participate in order to get to the next stage of decentralization. And so when you see BlackRock, when you see Fidelity, when you see all of the major names in the financial services industry now joining the party, that is a back-end to this emerging industry. And it's one of the most important things that signals the permanency and the success for the industry.
Well, listen, I cannot thank our guests earlier, Bruce Fein and Martin, Victoria, and Jamila, Javon, Gavin, and Gregory Johnson for joining us for today's broadcast. Enjoy the remainder of your weekend. We always try to bring you facts, but also what's going on in the economy, but also in the political spirit. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show.